Tonight we walk among stones that have watched centuries pass, stones that have soaked in monsoon rains, and moonlight stones that have seen empires rise and fall. The towers of Angkor Wat rise like darkened lotus buds against the sky, and you, quietly wandering, almost expect to hear the hum of ancient prayers echoing through the corridors. This is not just a ruin, it is a living memory, a heart that kept beating long after the body of the Khmer Empire crumbled. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world like a family, scattered but still connected. All right, now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You tread along a causeway where once kings processed in jeweled splendor, elephants swaying under gold-tipped parasols, and musicians beating rhythms that made the air itself tremble. The empire that built this was no ordinary kingdom. At its height in the 12th century, the Khmer realm stretched across much of Southeast Asia, and Angkor Wat was both temple and statement, a monumental we exist carved into stone. Built under King Suryavarman II as a dedication to Vishnu, it wasn't just a religious complex, it was a cosmic map, its towers mirroring Mount Meru, the mythical axis of the universe. Yet by the 15th century, this empire unraveled like silk snagged on thorns. Thai forces from Ayutthaya attacked internal strife, gnawed at the heart, and the capital was abandoned for Phnom Penh. You can almost hear the sigh of soldiers leaving their footsteps, fading into the jungle's roar. Still, Angkor Wat did not fall into silence overnight. Even as royal power shifted, monks remained tending to shrines, chanting under flickering oil lamps. Villagers stayed nearby, weaving their lives around the temple's stones, their stories blending with the ancient bas-reliefs. Historians still argue whether the abandonment was sudden, caused by a cataclysm like drought, or gradual, like an old man quietly slipping into sleep. What we do know is that the jungle did not ask permission to creep in. It wrapped its green fingers around walls, lifting stones, letting roots breathe where kings once walked. And you walk here centuries later, hearing the rustle of leaves that might as well be whispers from the past. One quirky thing you'll love: travelers in the centuries after collapse often thought Angkor Wat was built by giants or even beings from another realm, because who else would dare move stones? This massive locals told tales of divine architects, celestial builders, or the legendary figure Preah Pisnakar, a mythical master craftsman taught by gods themselves. These myths kept the memory alive even when political power had long since crumbled. They're like bedtime stories that refuse to fade, handed down by voices around smoky fires. And in those ruins you sense something else, a stubborn pride, even in the face of loss. When Ayutthaya warriors carried away treasures, they could not carry the soul of the place. The Khmer people, though scattered, carried its memory in their hearts. Perhaps this is why Angkor Wat never became just another ruin swallowed by nature. It remained a heartbeat, a quiet one, yes, but steady. Even as the centuries shifted, the stones stayed, and with them, so did the identity of a people who refused to forget. You continue along the temple's galleries, and now the air feels thicker, as though the jungle itself breathes with you. After the Khmer capital shifted to Phnom Penh in the 15th century, Angkor Wat became less a city and more a sanctuary, slowly merging with the wild. Imagine centuries of creeping silence broken only by the sound of cicadas, the occasional crack of branches under deer hooves, and the chant of monks who refused to leave. Vines began to crawl over bas-reliefs of epic battles, roots split stones that once held courtly dancers, and birds built nests where kings once prayed. The jungle, with its endless patience, claimed what humans had abandoned, Yet it never erased Angkor Wat completely. It just draped it with a veil of green mystery. You can almost see the orange-robed monks making their way through mist at dawn, stepping barefoot over worn stones, as if they themselves are part of the temple. For them, Angkor was never dead. It was sacred, alive with spiritual energy that no foreign army or passing century could extinguish. Pilgrims from across scattered Khmer territories continued to visit, lighting incense, whispering prayers and leaving offerings. Over time, the temple, originally built for Vishnu, transitioned almost seamlessly into a Buddhist shrine. This adaptability kept it relevant, a living monument rather than a fossil. Historians still debate whether this shift in worship was a slow cultural drift or an intentional act to preserve the temple under changing religious winds. There is a quirky tale often shared by villagers. Some believed the temple was protected by Nagas, mythical serpent guardians, who punished anyone who tried to desecrate it. One story tells of a thief who attempted to pry gold from a statue's eyes, only to vanish mysteriously by morning. Whether true or not, these stories served their purpose, instilling reverence, or at least fear, in anyone thinking of harming the temple. Meanwhile, the world outside changed. Kingdoms rose, fell, merged, and split again. Yet here, amid strangler figs and moss, Angkor Wat kept its quiet dignity. You imagine the roots as gentle fingers, not only tearing but also holding, as if the jungle itself chose to cradle the stones instead of crushing them. This slow dance between nature and temple gave birth to legends that would intrigue explorers centuries later. But in these centuries of obscurity, the temple's survival depended not on armies or rulers, but on ordinary monks, villagers, and the soft persistence of memory. You stand now under a canopy where sunlight filters like liquid gold, and you realize every stone you touch has endured rain, war, theft, and time itself. The jungle tried to take it, but the temple let itself be taken only halfway, staying hidden just enough to be remembered. It's almost poetic, isn't it? A monument to survival disguised as decay. And through this quiet endurance, Angkor Wat continued to beat as the secret heart of the Khmer spirit. You drift further into the passageways, and as you do, whispers from the past grow louder. This time they come from the pen of a foreigner. In the late 13th century, a Chinese diplomat named Cho Ta-Kwan visited Angkor, and his account remains the last detailed glimpse of the city before its decline. You follow him in your mind's eye, a man in silk robes, squinting against the Cambodian sun, writing about things he saw with the precision of an observer and the curiosity of an outsider. His descriptions paint a lively world, markets bustling with fish and rice palaces covered in golden tiles, and women so finely adorned that their jewelry shimmered like rain. Even centuries later, his words hum like ghosts trapped between the pages of time. But Cho Ta-Kwan also noticed cracks. He wrote of slaves laboring under harsh conditions of power that seemed fragile beneath the glitter, and of a city that, despite its magnificence, carried an undercurrent of strain. Historians still argue whether his writings exaggerated the decline or captured its early tremors accurately. Some say he glimpsed a civilization already bending under the weight of drought, internal feuds, and shifting trade routes. Others believe the empire remained strong for generations afterward, and that his observations were colored by the lens of a foreign courtier. Either way, you sense the fragility hiding beneath the grandeur. Among his quirkier notes is a detail that makes you smile. He observed that Khmer women were often bare-chested in daily life, something shocking to his Confucian sensibilities, and he couldn't stop mentioning it, perhaps a little too often. You almost imagine him blushing behind his brush, proof that even diplomats can get distracted. He also wrote about the odd practice of using crocodile dung as a form of sunscreen, a strange yet oddly resourceful tidbit that gives you an idea of how different daily life was in this tropical empire. After his departure, the records go silent. His writings became like a lantern left burning in a vast night, the last clear beam before the empire stepped off the stage of history. You feel the melancholy in that silence, as if the city itself was slowly folding into its own shadow. And yet, as centuries passed and power shifted to new capitals, Angkor Wat stayed. The monks kept chanting villagers, kept weaving legends, and even when war erupted again and again around it, the temple remained a steadfast witness. As you stand there, you can almost hear Chotaquan muttering, "Through time, I saw this once, and you will see it again." His words, carried by traders and scholars, ensured that the world beyond Cambodia never completely forgot this place. In a way, his writings became another kind of root, an invisible one that anchored Angkor Wat into history's soil. And without that root, perhaps the temple might have faded entirely from the world's memory, swallowed not by the jungle, but by time itself. You step through a doorway where the carvings seem to shimmer under the play of light, and suddenly you're walking in the footsteps of countless pilgrims. After the collapse of the Khmer Empire, when royal banners no longer flew over Angkor, the temple's role shifted into something quieter, but no less powerful. It became the sacred heart for wandering souls, Khmer people displaced by wars, farmers seeking blessings for their crops, monks searching for solitude, all of them drawn to these stones as if by an invisible thread. Imagine yourself among them, carrying offerings of lotus flowers, the scent of incense clinging to your hands, hearing the low hum of chants bouncing softly against the stone corridors. Even in ruin, Angkor Wat breathed faith. During this time, the temple transitioned fully into a Buddhist sanctuary. The statues of Vishnu were reinterpreted. New Buddha images were placed alongside old Hindu relics, and rituals evolved. This seamless transformation is something historians still puzzle over, how a site so deeply tied to one faith could adapt so gracefully to another without losing its essence. Perhaps the Khmer understood something about survival, that identity, like water, flows around obstacles rather than smashing through them. They let the old gods remain while welcoming the new, weaving both into a spiritual tapestry that kept Angkor alive. A quirky legend you might hear whispered by pilgrims of the past is the story of a hidden chamber under the central tower, said to hold a serpent princess who sleeps on a bed of gold. The legend claims that the king, to retain power, had to spend the night with her every year. If he failed, disaster would strike the kingdom. Of course, historians can't confirm whether this mythical liaison ever happened, but the tale endured, adding a layer of mystique that drew travelers even during times of hardship. As centuries rolled on, the Khmer people faced constant pressures, raids from neighboring kingdoms, shifting borders, loss of sovereignty. Yet Angkor Wat stood as a stubborn reminder of who they were. Pilgrims walked its galleries not only to pray, but to remember. In their quiet footsteps, the temple's identity transformed into something beyond stone and architecture. It became a mirror of resilience, reflecting back to its people their own strength, even when the world seemed to forget them. When you stand there now, you can almost feel that accumulated devotion, like layers of incense smoke settled into the pores of the sandstone. Every offering left at the foot of a statue, every whispered mantra in the early dawn, stitched together centuries of faith that never wavered. Even as the surrounding jungle and political powers shifted endlessly, Angkor Wat kept glowing softly, like an ember that never dies out completely. And in that ember, the Khmer identity smoldered, ready to flare into something brighter when the time came. You walk deeper, and the air stiffens with a different memory, the heavy rhythm of marching boots and the faint, metallic scent of weapons. In the centuries after Angkor's abandonment, Siamese armies from Ayutthaya clashed repeatedly with the Khmer, seizing territory and power. The temple, already wrapped in vines, became a silent witness to battles fought on its doorstep, and sometimes within its very grounds. You can almost see the silhouettes of soldiers moving through mist, the shine of spears catching the dawn, and the echo of war elephants rumbling like distant thunder. Angkor Wat, once the proud heart of an empire, now stood on contested ground, watching foreign banners rise and fall. The Siamese invasions were relentless, chipping away at the Khmer kingdom until much of its former territory was absorbed. Yet even under Siamese occupation, Angkor Wat retained a strange sanctity. Thai generals, aware of its sacred aura, often ordered their men to spare the main temple. They might strip treasures or remove statues, but the structure itself was rarely defiled. It's as if even the conquerors felt uneasy desecrating something so monumental. Historians still argue whether this restraint came from genuine reverences or simple superstition, but either way the temple endured. Among local villagers, legends bloomed like wildflowers. One tale spoke of a mysterious light that rose from the temple's central tower during nights of heavy fog, frightening intruders away. Another claimed that a golden naga would coil itself around the foundations whenever foreign soldiers approached, protecting the sacred site from complete destruction. These stories, whispered from parent to child, kept a quiet pride alive. They reminded the Khmer that even in defeat, they had something the conquerors could never truly take. You can almost picture the locals sneaking back to the temple after battles, clearing debris, lighting incense again, and resuming their rituals under the watchful eyes of carved apsaras. For them, Angkor Wat wasn't just a relic, it was proof that their culture survived no matter who claimed political control. The Thai presence may have altered the political map, but the spiritual map of the Khmer world still centered on these lotus towers. A quirky detail from this period tells how some Thai kings reportedly brought pieces of Angkor sculptures, relics, even monks back to Ayutthaya as tokens of victory. Yet ironically, these artifacts only spread the legend of Angkor Wat, further making it a known wonder beyond Cambodian borders. This backfired in a way. The more they took, the more people spoke of the temple's majesty, and the stronger its myth grew. Walking here now, you sense that quiet defiance lingering in the stones. Wars came, flags changed, and power slipped through countless hands, but the temple stood. It became not only a sanctuary, but a stubborn reminder to the Khmer that no army could erase their heritage. Even when history tried to write them out, the silhouette of Angkor Wat kept appearing unerasable on the horizon of memory. You step into a corridor where the jungle thins, and a different kind of voice calls out not the chants of monks or the clash of soldiers, but the sharp, curious tones of 19th century explorers. Centuries after the Siamese Wars, Angkor Wat remained half hidden, its stones cloaked in vines, its towers peeking above a canopy of green like fingers reaching for the sky. And then came the French with their sketchbooks, cameras, and a dramatic sense of discovery. In the 1860s, a young naturalist named Henri Mouhot wandered through the jungle and wrote about Angkor as though he had stumbled upon a lost world. He wasn't the first European to see it, but his romantic descriptions caught Europe's imagination, painting the temple as an exotic mystery waiting to be claimed by science and art. You follow these explorers in your mind's eye, tropical helmets perched awkwardly on their heads, swatting mosquitoes, scribbling notes while trying not to faint in the heat. They marveled at the bas-reliefs of epic battles, the endless apsaras dancing on the walls, the sheer size of a temple that seemed to laugh at time itself. Yet they often misunderstood what they saw. Many of them, steeped in colonial arrogance, believed the Khmer people of their day could not possibly have built something so grand. Historians still argue whether this was ignorance or a deliberate way to justify colonial intervention. After all, claiming a lost civilization is easier when you convince yourself its descendants have forgotten how to create greatness. The quirky part. Some early explorers even speculated that Angkor Wat was connected to ancient Egypt, or that it was built by Alexander the Great's lost soldiers. The idea that Cambodians themselves had this legacy seemed too ordinary for their dramatic imaginations. These wild theories may sound laughable now, but they show how myth thrives when history is half known. As more French scholars arrived, they began documenting, sketching, and eventually restoring parts of the temple. Their work preserved much of Angkor, but it also carried a certain possessiveness, as if France had rescued the monument from obscurity. Local Cambodians, however, never saw it as lost. For them, the temple was never abandoned. It simply lived in a quieter rhythm, watched over by monks and villagers who didn't need outsiders to tell them its worth. You can almost see the contrast: French explorers marveling at their discovery, while barefoot monks continue their morning prayers as they have for centuries, unbothered by the foreign fuss. Still, the arrival of these outsiders changed the way the world saw Angkor. Their writings and photographs traveled far, making the temple famous across continents. Tourists began to dream of it. Scholars debated its history. And suddenly the jungle no longer seemed to hold it back. It was as if the temple had stepped back into the spotlight whether it wanted to or not. This rediscovery also stirred something within the Khmer people. Seeing foreigners so fascinated by their monument reminded them of its importance, rekindling pride that had quietly smoldered for centuries. Angkor Wat was no longer just a sacred site hidden in the trees. It was becoming once again a symbol of something larger, something that would soon ignite into the flames of national identity. You wander into a gallery where faded carvings still shimmer under the light, and you feel the weight of the colonial era pressing in. By the late 19th century, Cambodia had fallen under French protectorate rule, and with that came a new chapter for Angkor Wat, one that mixed preservation with appropriation. The French did not just study the temple, they used it to craft their own narrative of stewardship. They presented themselves as the protectors of a glorious but fallen Khmer heritage, a clever way to justify their control. You can almost hear the condescending speeches. "We are saving these ruins from the jungle," they would say, while quietly ignoring the monks who had been safeguarding it all along. Restoration efforts began in earnest under the École Française d'Extrême-Orient, with scholars carefully clearing routes, stabilizing walls, and reconstructing collapsed towers. This work preserved Angkor Wat, but it also reshaped how it was perceived. French artists, writers, and photographers captured its image endlessly, turning it into a symbol of mystery and beauty for Western audiences. At the same time, they subtly framed it as part of France's colonial civilizing mission. Historians still argue whether the French preservation was an act of genuine respect or a way to cement their claim over Cambodia's cultural soul. Perhaps it was both a mix of admiration and control. Yet colonial rule ironically planted seeds of nationalism. Seeing Angkor Wat through the colonial lens depicted in posters, coins, and exhibitions reminded Cambodians of their own lost greatness. Local intellectuals began to reimagine the temple not as a relic of the past, but as a beacon for the future. It became the symbol around which early nationalist movements gathered strength. You can almost hear the whispers in colonial cafes. "If we once built this, we can rise again." A quirky detail from this era is how French postcards of Angkor Wat became wildly popular in Europe, almost like early Instagram shots. Tourists would collect them, boasting of their adventures, while Cambodians living under colonial rule looked at the same images and felt a different emotion: longing, pride, and maybe a quiet defiance. The temple also became a stage for cultural blending. French researchers documented Khmer legends, artists painted romanticized versions of the ruins, and writers described Angkor as the eighth wonder of the world. But for the Khmer, these external views were only part of the story. Beneath the colonial gloss, the temple still pulsed with local rituals, still received offerings, still hummed with prayers. It never stopped being theirs. By the early 20th century, Angkor Wat was firmly re-entrenched as the spiritual and cultural heart of Cambodia, even if its image was being paraded through Parisian exhibitions. The paradox is almost poetic. The more the French tried to claim it as part of their colonial trophy case, the stronger it became as a rallying point for Khmer identity. Under layers of colonial narratives, the temple was quietly sharpening itself into the symbol that would one day wave on the flag of an independent Cambodia. You walk out from the shadowed corridors into the open courtyard, where the towers rise like dark flames against the sky, and the scene shifts to the mid-20th century when the world itself seemed to be catching fire. Colonial rule began to crumble after World War II, and Cambodian voices grew louder, demanding independence. Through these turbulent decades, Angkor Wat became more than an ancient temple. It became the soul of the nation, the rallying cry on the lips of protesters and poets alike. You can almost hear the marches in Phnom Penh, the quiet defiance in student gatherings, and the proud murmur of elders who reminded the young, "Remember, we built Angkor." When Cambodia finally gained independence in 1953, the choice to place Angkor Wat on the national flag was no coincidence. Few countries display a building on their flag, and fewer still one that carries such deep, layered meaning. Those lotus towers fluttering on the new tricolour banner told the world, "We are Khmer, we have always been here, we will always endure." Historians still debate whether the inclusion of Angkor Wat was purely symbolic or also a subtle political message to neighbouring Thailand and Vietnam, both of which had histories intertwined with Cambodian territory. But to ordinary Cambodians it was simply pride stitched into cloth. During this era, King Norodom Sihanouk promoted Angkor Wat as the jewel of Cambodia, opening it to international tourism, celebrating it in films, and even using it as a backdrop for state ceremonies. Tourists flocked to marvel at its grandeur, diplomats posed for photographs, and the temple stepped fully into the modern world's gaze. Yet it was not just a tourist site, it remained a sacred space, still pulsing with chants, at dawn still guarded by villagers' stories of Nagas and celestial builders. The quirky detail here. In the 1960s, the Cambodian government used Angkor Wat as a backdrop for propaganda films where actors in golden crowns danced dramatically among the ruins, blending history and modern politics in a single frame. These films, though sometimes melodramatic, reinforced the temple's role as a living emblem, not a fossilized artifact. But this period of pride was also fragile. Political tensions swirled, the Vietnam War bled across borders, and Cambodia teetered on the edge of chaos. Through it all, Angkor Wat remained like a calm eye in a storm. Visitors who came in those years often described feeling an almost eerie serenity at the site, as if the temple itself knew that more storms were coming, but chose to stand silently against them. You walk among the stones and feel that same serenity, now tinged with an unsettling awareness that the darkest chapter of its modern history was about to unfold. For now, though, in this moment, Angkor Wat glows on the flag, gleams in the sun, and radiates a quiet confidence. It has survived kings, invaders, and colonizers. Why not also the storms of modern politics? And as Cambodia stepped into independence, the temple stood tall not just as an echo of the past, but as a promise for the future. You move into a shadowed hallway where the carvings seem almost to shiver under your touch, and the air feels heavy with the weight of a darker time. The 1970s swept over Cambodia like a storm, bringing civil war, foreign bombings, and finally, the rise of the Khmer Rouge. Under Pol Pot's brutal regime, the country descended into what survivors still call Year Zero, a time when history itself was meant to be erased and society rebuilt from ashes. Angkor Wat, the proud heart of the nation, became a silent witness to unspeakable horrors. You can almost hear the silence of that era, not peaceful, but suffocating, as though the stones themselves were holding their breath. The Khmer Rouge twisted national pride into something cruel. They used Angkor Wat as propaganda, parading it as proof of Cambodia's ancient strength, while simultaneously dismantling the very culture that had nurtured it. Intellectuals were executed, traditions were banned, cities emptied, and yet the temple stood untouched. Historians still debate why the regime spared Angkor Wat when so much else was destroyed. Some believe it was because of its power as a propaganda symbol, others because even the most hardened cadres felt a lingering fear of desecrating something so sacred. Quirky details from this period are rare, for humor and lightness were almost entirely smothered. Yet there is one haunting story whispered among locals. Some claimed they saw ghostly apsaras, the celestial dancers carved into the walls, moving at night, as if the spirits themselves mourned for the suffering people. Whether true or a product of fear, this legend gave villagers a fragile hope, a sign that not everything divine had abandoned them. When the regime collapsed in 1979, Cambodia emerged scarred and hollow. Angkor Wat, however, remained standing, its stones weathered but intact, its silhouette still rising against the dawn. Refugees returning to ruined villages found solace in the temple's survival, as if it had kept a piece of their identity safe while everything else was torn away. Monks slowly returned, rituals resumed, and the site once again became a sanctuary for prayers whispered through tears. International eyes turned back to Cambodia, now horrified by what had happened. Aid workers, journalists, and archaeologists arrived, documenting both the atrocities and the resilience. And there, among all the devastation, Angkor Wat became not just a national symbol, but a global one, a reminder of the endurance of culture, even in the face of unimaginable darkness. You can feel it now as you walk through its galleries. The stones seem to carry a double weight, both the glory of an empire and the grief of a nation that almost lost itself. Standing beneath the central tower, you realize that Angkor Wat's survival through this era is almost miraculous. It endured not because of armies or governments, but because it had become untouchable in the minds of everyone, from villagers to soldiers to tyrants. Even at humanity's lowest, something in those lotus-shaped towers demanded reverence. And that perhaps is why it still stands today, because some things are simply too sacred to destroy. You step out into the open causeway, where the first light of dawn spills across the stones, and the story glides into the present day. Cambodia slowly rebuilt itself after decades of turmoil, and with peace came a renewed devotion to Angkor Wat. In 1992, UNESCO recognized the temple as a World Heritage Site, cementing its status not only as a national treasure, but as part of humanity's shared legacy. The world now came to marvel, and Cambodia welcomed them, balancing pride with the challenge of preserving a monument that millions wanted to see. You can almost hear the voices of tourists in dozens of languages, cameras clicking where centuries ago monks' chants once echoed. The influx of tourism brought both blessings and worries. Revenue from visitors helped restore the temple, yet too many feet on fragile stones risked wearing down what time had miraculously preserved. Conservation teams worked tirelessly, sometimes arguing over how much to restore and how much to leave in its weathered state. Historians still debate whether the temple's true magic lies in its untouched ruins or in the polished reconstructions that keep it standing. Meanwhile, villagers nearby continue their daily rituals. Monks still light incense, and the spiritual life of the temple quietly persists amid the hum of tour buses. A quirky modern twist is how Angkor Wat has become a magnet for sunrise selfies. Instagram is flooded with photos of travelers standing before the silhouette of its towers, the sky painted in pinks and oranges. Yet behind every picture is a deeper story, one that not all tourists pause to consider: that this temple has survived wars, colonization and genocide to stand here welcoming them. For many Cambodians, seeing these photos is bittersweet. They are proud that the world loves their temple, but they also hope visitors understand its sacred weight. Today, Angkor Wat is everywhere: on the Cambodian flag, in school textbooks, on currency and art, and in the hearts of the people. It is no longer just a monument of the past, it is an anchor for the present and a compass for the future. The temple stands not only as an architectural wonder, but as a story carved in stone, a story of survival, faith, and identity. You stand beneath its towering spires, and you feel all the centuries pressing softly around you like hands resting on your shoulders, reminding you that history lives not just in books, but in places that breathe. As the sun rises fully, the temple glows with a golden warmth. You notice how the towers seem almost weightless, as if they're floating between earth and sky, between past and present. Angkor Wat has been many things: a temple of gods, a fortress, a refuge, a prize, a symbol, and now a global icon. But at its core, it has always been a heart that beats for Cambodia, steady through every storm. And now, as you stand there in the soft light, the story slows, the voices fade, and only the quiet hum of the temple remains, inviting you to breathe deeply and simply be. The sky above the temple deepens into soft hues, and the world begins to blur at the edges, as though the story itself wants to rest. You take one last slow walk along the ancient stones, your footsteps echoing gently against the silence. The air feels warm, the breeze almost like a sigh, and every tower of Angkor Wat seems to lean just slightly closer, as if it too is whispering you towards sleep. You notice how the carvings shimmer under fading light, each figure frozen in eternal dance, each face worn yet serene. They have stood here for centuries, and they will stand long after you have gone, keeping their secrets while the jungle hums quietly around them. The more you slow your breath, the softer the details become, the faint scent of incense, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a monk's chant carried by the wind. The temple no longer feels heavy with history, it feels light, almost floating, as though it drifts with you into the space between waking and dreams. You think of the people who have walked here before, kings, soldiers, pilgrims, explorers, villagers, tourists, all of them leaving a little piece of themselves behind. Now it's your turn to leave a whisper, to let the story settle in your mind like dust in sunlight. As the night folds itself gently over Angkor, what you sink deeper into the calm. The stones fade into shadow, the voices into silence, and soon only your breath remains slow and steady, like the heartbeat of the temple itself.